Hey everyone, this is Lisa and Nancy with Big Blend Radio, and we are in Greeley, Colorado on our Love Your Parks tour, and today we are sitting in the Greeley History Museum. Is that correct, Peggy?
That is correct. Welcome.
Hey, thank you for joining us. And everyone, Peggy's full name is Peggy Ford Waldo. What do you do here at the museum?
I'm the development curator for the Greeley Museums, and I've had the privilege of working for the city of Greeley and its museums division since 1979, so I've been here a long time.
Wow, so you know everything.
No, I don't know everything. The beauty of working in a museum is every day you meet new and wonderful people, and you learn new and wonderful things. So
what
it's been my privilege.
do you do?
Since
what's your day like?
2010, 2011, my job has been to help raise not only awareness but money for the museums for special projects and things,
cool.
Especially things that our municipal budget doesn't necessarily cover in our museum operations. So that is my job, but I've had many other jobs here as educator, as the manager of our museum archives, known as the Hazel E. Johnson Research Center, and I've also developed a number of programs at our 4 museum sites. So the city of Greeley, a community of about 110,000 today, is fortunate in that we have 4 museum facilities owned and operated by the city of Greeley.
Wow, cool. So we also have Amy Dugan here, who's been our tour guide of Greeley, and she's put up with us. Let's just put it that way. She's put up with us for a few days. But Amy, so today is the first. Well, we've been to Fort Lupton. We did that yesterday, so we got a little bit of history of that's more Weld County, right? But Greeley is the county seat, and but today we're here at the museum, and then we're doing some of these 4 sites, right?
Yes, so we're going to make sure that Peggy takes you through the Greeley History Museum, and then we'll go over to the Meeker Home Museum and take a look at what that home was like for Nathan Meeker and his family in the 1870s, and it's restored to the 1870 period, so it's great fun. And then sometime later this week we'll be out to Centennial Village, and make sure you're out there. But we are just so appreciative of you all coming into the Weld County Greeley area and visiting our wonderful city.
Well, I think, thank you, number one, because I'm so glad we found you here.
I know,
because we're coming back already.
This is one of the most fun places we've been.
It's beautiful.
It really is.
And the history, the buildings, when you drive in, you go, wow, I mean, they're keeping their identity here, and I think that's very important. Now, Amy mentioned Nathan Meeker, and when our first radio chat we had with Amy and Jen Finch from Weld County Discover Weld, we learned that, okay, so Horace Greeley came through here, and so I know obviously Greeley's named after him, and then we've got James Michener, wrote Centennial off of the grasslands, out here, but where does Nathan Meeker come in?
Nathan Meeker, of course, Nathan Cook Meeker, is the founder of our town, Greeley, Colorado, and he was a native of Ohio. As a young man, he became very interested in utopian ideals, and especially the ideals of a French socialist reformer named Francois Charles Marie Fourier. Fourier hoped to develop outside of Paris in the early 1800s a new type of community in which people came together, lived in communes. There were no armies, and in which industrial he was a hippie, yes. Yay. In which industrial armies were created that would provide irrigation systems, clear the land, improve the land. And so Meeker became fascinated by these utopian ideals, which came to America through a man named Albert Brisbane, who promoted them as associationism. So Meeker, after he married in April of 1844, by September, he was living in a commune in eastern Ohio along Eagle Creek. It was called the Trumbull Phalanx, and it was based on the ideals put forth by Mr. Fourier's concepts. And so The problem, of course, with where he located, it was in a swampy area. At any given time, about 60% of the workforce, the male workforce, the individuals who would be out clearing the land and planting and plowing and what have you, had the fevers or the ague or consumption. So it wasn't in a well-drained area. People just weren't thriving, and the community failed by October of 1847. Meeker was not to be deterred, however, and he learned a lot of what it took to bring people together to try to create community. And so he began then thinking about the American West. He had read John Charles Fremont's journals. He had always wanted to see the Rocky Mountains. And in 1866, he was living in southern Illinois, down in a little community known as Dongola, close to where the Ohio and Mississippi rivers meet, near Cairo, Illinois. And he became a reporter for the New York Tribune, reporting on the battles fought in that area, the Union generals, Pope, for one, and after the war ended, he was able then, well, he was a reporter for the New York Tribune, reporting on Civil War from 1861 to 1865. And in 1866, the ag editor of the New York Tribune, Mr. Richardson, retired, and Nathan Meeker then was invited by Horace Greeley, who realized his ability to write, as the ag editor. Meeker had lived since 1857 down in the southern Illinois area, tried to have a fruit farm, small fruits, strawberries, and so on. And he liked to travel, was interested in different ideas. So he was quickly hired on then, and the family moved to Brooklyn, New York, and that's where they lived until they came to Greeley in the summer of 1870. So in 1869, Meeker comes on a reporting expedition, and he's riding on the train, and he was eventually to try to get to Salt Lake City and interview Brigham Young and learn how the Mormons had developed Salt Lake City and farming in the Salt Lake Valley. But a huge snowstorm across southern Wyoming blocked the railroad tracks. In order not to be slowed down, he ended up coming into Colorado Territory, meeting with Denver businessmen who were real boosters of this area, who encouraged him, since he was interested in perhaps living in Colorado Territory, to go back and really promote it. And so that started Meeker thinking about, how do I start a utopian temperance and farming community in the American West? And so he wrote an article called A Western Colony, put forth all of his ideals, and that appeared in the December 4th, 1869 edition of the New York Tribune. Of course, that newspaper was one of the most well-respected newspapers worldwide at that time. People reading his article became completely inspired. He received over 3,000 letters from people who said, I want to be a colonist. I want to come west with you. And
That's cool.
so Meeker then
I like it.
went ahead, and based on that response, that overwhelming response, he'd received 1,000 letters in the first few weeks of December. He organized a joint stock colonization company called the Union Colony of Colorado, Union Colony number 1.
Wow.
And so that meeting took place on December 23rd at the Cooper Institute in New York City, and 59 people paid $155 to join. Horace Greeley was the treasurer. All the money went into a common account, and that money from memberships was reserved for the purchase of land somewhere in the American West when the right place for a farming community was found. A locating committee came out in February, and by March they had determined that and had begun the purchase of lands lying between the confluence of the South Platte and the Cache-la-Poudre rivers. And so eventually 59,000 acres was secured, and members then began arriving at the end of April and first part of May of 1870.
Wow.
So if you were a colonist, your $155 entitled you to purchase within the 1 square mile platted area of Greeley a inside lot for $25 or a big corner lot for $50 on
I'll
which
take the corner lot.
to
Yeah, talk about
have
real estate.
your home.
Okay, so
That's
people
great.
listening now, if he was to do this today, do you think people would kind of think it's cultish in a way to do it, or just a really smart real estate broker?
Cultish? Well, Meeker, of course, screened all of these letters and eventually had an application process.
Oh,
He
wow.
asked people how old they were, what their occupations were in the East. Were they continuing this occupation in the West if they were selected as a colonist? Or would they be entering into a new occupational venture?
So he really was.
He
wanted
was
this,
screening.
He was trying to create the ultimate
These
society.
were, yes, the chosen people. He wanted to make sure this was an agricultural and temperance community. So we were the third temperance community.
What does that exactly mean?
Temperance means that no alcohol
See, we
is
just lost
allowed
that.
Well, I'm out. I'm out.
in
I'm
the
out.
colony.
I'm
You're
out.
out. That's right. That's right. So people were writing letters. I am a temperance individual. So the ideals for the community were temperance, religion, education, agriculture and irrigation, cooperation, and family values. So you ask about the cult, I suppose. So some of the ideals I think that Meeker looked to for inspiration for this community, he ended up looking towards the Mormons and what they had achieved in a semi-arid environment in Salt Lake City. So again, the ideals of cooperative spirit, family, agriculture, irrigation, religion, education, some of these came from the Mormons. In fact, Meeker said anyone who was thinking of starting a community in the American West would do well to look to the Mormons and their achievements
They have done a lot.
in the
I mean,
Salt
they
Lake
really
Valley.
have.
Right.
They really have.
Yes. Meeker, however, of course, was not a Mormon. He was a member of the Disciples of Christ, or the Christian Church, but abandoned that over a little issue he had with them. So I would say Meeker himself was more than likely an agnostic or atheist. But again, he believed in bringing together a very moral and energetic group of people. Many of the first colonists, there were 737 of them that were chosen. A lot of them were just investors. So we just had between 300 and 400 of those people actually come as colonists and settle in Greeley.
I think
many
it's
of them were
interesting
older.
because
They weren't teenagers. They were
Right.
older because you had to have at least $1,000
That's a lot of money back then.
because Meeker saw the colony he lived in Ohio fail due to lack of cooperation, due to bad location, and due to a lack of money, and he didn't want to repeat those mistakes in Greeley.
See, that's interesting. I think, the ideals of it makes sense. You
Yeah,
want to have a
yeah.
nice community,
Right.
want something to be safe. It's like the village theory. And for him to go to the Mormons and say, hey, how are you doing this, making sure, I think it's,
Right.
and that was after Ohio, right? So he kind
Yes,
of learned from
yes.
that and learned from that and
Right.
brings it here. So
Yes.
so he built this, and so how do you think from people moving in to what it's become now, how do you think it's changed?
Greeley has become a much more diverse community. So, for example, Meeker was not necessarily fond of bringing in anyone who was a Catholic because they used alcohol, in their church ceremonies, wine. He mistrusted ethnic groups that produced alcohol. For example, the Germans were known for their good beer and spirits. So it was a very WASP community, white, Anglo-Saxon, Protestant community.
Okay.
We did not have a Catholic church organized in Greeley until 1890. However, the first year that Greeley was established, there were 6 Protestant churches founded within 6 months. So again, religion played a factor. We had a school that was started the first summer that Greeley was founded. So education has, continued to be a big value. Not a lot of diversity though. And so that was to come later with the expansion of agriculture. When, at first there were just the migrant Anglo workers or hobos who would come in to help with the potato harvest in the 1870s and 1880s. But as agriculture expanded, we had the primarily second generation Swedish Americans come in and work the fields. Once sugar beets became an important crop in the first 10 years of the 20th century, then we had a lot of new immigrants come into Greeley, and the diversity became very apparent very early on in those opening decades of the 20th century. We had the Germans from Russia. They were the stoop laborers in the sugar beet fields and later industry. Many of them purchased their lands. They became successful farmers. When they went on strike for better wages in 1904, then we had Japanese agents recruit Japanese workers from Logan and Salt Lake City, Utah come in. So then we get a wave of Japanese people coming in to work in agriculture from Brighton up through Alt, and including Greeley. And then our last wave in the opening decades of the 20th century were the Hispanic workers. Many were recruited from the Rio Grande Valley, from the San Luis Valley of Colorado, northern New Mexico, and the border cities of Texas.
Wow.
And then we began to get a lot of Mexican nationals through the Bracero program established during World War II to help relieve the shortage of agricultural laborers due to so many American men being recruited into the armed services during World War II.
Wow.
So in more recent years, we have lots of Asians in our community. We have people from East Africa, Eritrea, Somalia, the Sudan.
Right on.
We have people from Mexico,
Right on.
Central and South America.
Cool.
And our Global Refugee Center here today is serving people from, I think last count, about 47 different cultures. So
Wow.
Greeley, is in a way a global village today and very much a global economy because we have so many products that are exported outside of not only our region and state, but into Mexico and to Asian countries, other countries around the world. So
Diversity was the change, and then Amy's over at Visit Greeley, so you got to go to visitgreeley.org when you come out here. Just got to do that. But Amy, how many breweries and distilleries now?
We go from being founded on temperance to 10 breweries and distilleries just in the city limits now. Variety of churches, we have just blossomed into such a diverse, welcoming community. It's kind of amazing when we look back at where we started and where we're going.
And now, tourism is also part of this now as part of your economy?
Very much. It's we draw people in with lots of good events, great attractions, wonderful museums, and people
history.
tend to come back because we're warm, we're welcoming, and we're fun.
You are fun. And this is true. I wanted to touch on, and going back to Nathan Meeker, because one of the first things we saw in the exhibit, and actually was about, what was the thing about you plant your flag here, that you're basically part of the world. Everyone's come from somewhere.
Oh, yes, put up a little flag from where you are.
Yes, I love that.
Yeah, that's
but
really
then
nice.
Nathan Meeker, there's the Meeker Massacre. So this is what happened to Nathan.
That is what happened to Nathan. Nathan Meeker had a number of jobs once he came to Colorado Territory, founded Greeley, and he started our first newspaper. He was one of the assistant commissioners at the Centennial Exposition in Philadelphia in 1876, so he was away from his family for almost a year. The reason for this was to earn extra money because the Meeker home, which you will visit, cost $6,000. It was an experimental home built of adobe bricks. He was always just kind of trying to just scrape by. He was not what I would say a good financial manager. Probably a lot of people can relate to that today,
Yeah,
given
it's a
our
little
credit card
up
debt
and
in our
down.
country.
Yeah,
But so Meeker was always trying to find ways to earn extra money, and so he sought a position as Indian agent at the White River Ute Agency in northwestern Colorado, which is located near the present-day community of Meeker, named for him, of course. Based the U.S. government's policy toward Native Americans at that time was to make them self-sufficient through agriculture. A lot of people flocking into the new state of Colorado at that time were a bit wary of nomadic Indians. There was that notion that they were, quote, savages, they could scalp you, whatever. So Meeker had shown that Greeley very quickly became a viable and prosperous community due to irrigation. So lots of experimentation went into digging the 2 ditches to serve the needs of the town and the needs of the farmers. And so it was thought that he would be the ideal individual since he knew something about farming. He had done it himself. He had organized people together. And again, you need to bring, the Utes together and bring them, so that they stay on the reservation.
Okay.
So that
Once that
Meeker
community
can maybe
again.
get that community going.
And you will be temperance for you all.
You won't need to go out. Yes, you won't need to
Yeah.
follow the nomadic lifestyle of 10,000 years. So Meeker was thought to be the ideal person to do that. So he went over and he realized that the original location of the agency was in a narrow mountain valley, and he proposed moving it down into a flatter area where actually agriculture could be practiced more easily. And he paid the Indians to dig irrigation ditches, help move the agency. But one of the things that began to happen was just the cultural conflicts. The Utes, of course, during the hot summers would go up into the mountains where it was cooler,
Makes sense.
come down in the valleys, in the winter. And so he had trouble trying to convince them after he began plowing the fields to stay and care for what they had planted. He was one who, like many Americans at the time, did not understand Native cultures, that, in Native cultures of the different tribes within our own state and across the American West, the men were the hunters and the storytellers, and the rest of the work was performed by women. So there was the gathering of any herbs or wild turnips or onions, anything that might be needed. It was the women that did more of that farming aspect. So when Nathan Meeker hitch the teams of horses to the plows and put the Indian men behind them to plow areas to plant. The women would line the fields and just, point their fingers, and they would be, just doubled over in belly laughter, because in essence, the museum the Indians were, the men were doing women's work. So, a lot of just culturally difficult things that Nathan Meeker probably would not necessarily have picked up on. So, so he had proposed then in the summer of 1879. He left for the agency in May 15th of 1879, that in order to sustain more Indians coming in to that, the White River Agency, the reservation, more land would need to be plowed. And he proposed some lands that the Indians had used for pasturing their horses and for their pony races. And of course, horses were vital importance to the Ute culture. And so there was conflict over that, the notion that if you're pasturing horses, to plow up the pasture, grass no good upside down. And so this was a conflict. One of the chiefs had shoved Meeker against the fence post on his agent's house and had badly injured his shoulder. And Meeker had called the governor, Pitkin, for reinforcements of troops coming down out of Wyoming to help protect the agency, and the chiefs warned him, if they cross Milk Creek, it will be all-out war. And of course, what ended up happening then was what the chiefs had promised. The troops came, they crossed Milk Creek, the Indians were lying in ambush, and so Major Thornburg's men were killed, and the Utes killed Nathan Meeker and 10 employees at the agency on September 29th, 1879. So this was one of the last major Indian battles in the state of Colorado, and of course it sealed the fate for the native peoples, because again they were put on reservations. Many went to Utah. The instigators of the massacre were arrested. Some went to Leavenworth in Kansas to prison.
No way.
And then eventually by 1882, then a million acres of native land was opened up to Anglo settlement in that area, where of course there's lots of ranching and so on today.
So then all the grass got turned upside down.
Yes, so it's a very different, ideal. But Meeker's wife had joined him at the agency, and she was kind of known as Mother of the Utes. She had a medicine kit, a homeopathic medicine kit, and she had helped cure some sick children. And but during the massacre, the women tried to run and hide in the milk house, but eventually they were taken. And Josephine, Nathan Meeker's daughter, was held captive as well. She had been brought over to the agency to run the boarding house. To teach school to the Indian children there. And then another woman, Flora Ellen Price, and her 2 young children, May and Johnny. These 5 were held for 23 days in the wilderness. And the sister of Chief Uray, Shashin, sometimes known as Strong Sunlight, helped secure the release of the women unharmed. And they came back to Greeley then and lived in the Meeker home. So more of that story, I suppose, we can continue later. But yes, so in our community, was suggested that this community be called Meeker for the man whose ideal started it. Meeker, though, realized that he was an unknown. but the person in America whom everybody knew the name of was Horace Greeley. He was well respected. His newspaper was read far and wide. So he said that for marketing purposes, if nothing else, and it was true.
Look at that.
Let's name that community after a very famous man who has supported Nathan Meeker and his efforts to start this great agricultural community in the American West. So Greeley it became. And then, of course, as we look west towards the mountain range, we see the two tall peaks on the right would be Long's Peak, named after the American explorer Stephen Harriman Long, and then to the south or to the left is Mount Meeker, named also after Nathan Meeker, and then the community of Meeker located near the second site of that White River Agency. So,
what a story.
Anyway, it's an interesting story. Meeker kind of, there were 8 agents who had been at the White River Agency since 1863, and none of them had really done well by the Utes. When Meeker arrived, the annuity goods had not been released by its previous agent, Mr. Danforth, for 18 months. So again, when you have flour and provisions being stored in, a government warehouse in Rawlins, Wyoming, they get mealyworms and things rot. And so why would the native people believe that the newest agent would be any different than those who had come previously and had not done right by the Utes who were in that area?
Any reason why they didn't?
Any reason why they didn't?
Yeah.
I think it was probably just really difficult to, number one, maybe get a handle on the situation. The Utes were self-sufficient. They had relied on hunting and gathering and had a successful lifestyle by standards that they had culturally and practically embraced for centuries upon centuries.
Well, it's interesting with that too, because when Native Americans or Indians went into reservations in certain areas in California, I don't know if it happens in Utah or up in this area, the Paiutes, which is part of the Utes, decided we're not going to be part of that, and so they do their own thing. They live in society, and outside of the reservation, so they don't get the benefits of being together with the casino money and all of that kind of thing. But they're out and about. Like, it's interesting.
It is.
But they're independent that way, but at the same time losing connections by not being together, trying to relearn their language and things like that. So it's interesting when you talk about them being self-sufficient, because they're that way. It's like, heck no, you ain't putting us, here. We'll do what we want.
Well, it's kind of like, here, let us just take your land and we'll put you over here, but we'll help you out, but not really.
But we don't understand the way you worked, or we don't appreciate that you already had a society, you already had a culture, you already had a working environment for your people that was successful. We wanted to change it.
But that's history. No matter, isn't that the interesting thing? You look at what like Nathan Meeker, and some of his ideals are, make sense, sounds great. It's nice on paper, right? And then at the same time, the mistakes he made, he wants the community all together, was not listening to the community. From the story from just listening, hearing that, it's like if you took that one extra step, it probably would have worked more, And it's weird because we can sit and point fingers as we want in today, but
we weren't there.
We weren't there. So you gotta,
Nathan Meeker, it's quite fun for those who would like to explore a little bit more from his firsthand impressions of being an agent. He wrote a lot of long articles that were published in the Greeley Tribune during that era. And he talks about a Ute woman named Jane, and he was quite fond of Jane, and she was very smart, and he, said, these are your fields, I'll help you plow them and plant them and so on. And then, of course, Jane disappointed him because she went with members of her tribe up into the mountains and just kind of abandoned the fields for the summer. And so he came back, when everybody came back, and he asked her about it. She didn't have much to say, but he said, I went to all this hard work. I cared for your fields, and what's in it for me? And of course, she presented him with about 6 turnips from the field. So, but again,
Here you go.
that was the
can make it into a
gesture of appreciation. But again, in the grand scheme of Jane's universe, what did turnips being pulled out of a field after, hanging out where it was hot and irrigating?
Exactly.
And what was the meaning of all of that?
Yeah, why should
Cultural
why?
sensitivity, diversity, inclusive. We still struggle with this today
Yes, but I mean,
in our
it's
communities.
true. Why would you stay where it's going to get really hot when you can go up where it's pretty and cool to grow turnips?
Right.
Something's wrong there.
Where did, I know, so he was in Ohio, but where was the name Meeker? Is that of British descent?
Yes, that's correct. So Nathan Meeker was descended from, there were 4 brothers named Meeker. Sometimes you will find it spelled Meaker, then eventually Meeker, that came into the colonies in the 1630s. So many of them were settling in New York and New Jersey, and then, like many people, coming west.
Do you know where in England that his family originates from?
I would have to look that up. I did at one point. I wasn't thinking.
Because we were on a story mission for our friend Glenn Burroughs in England. He's a historian, a family historian, and we go around and find English ties between, through history, and he goes on his side and he'll look up the family in England.
Okay, that sounds fun.
I know, he's going to do it for the Luptons, Fort Lupton. He's going to do that too.
Right.
So we'll just throw the Meeker in there.
We'll throw the Meeker in the
there,
Luptons
yes.
and see what's
Right.
going on. So, so I thought that would be fun to explore as well. The other thing, speaking of that,
It might be Lancashire, but I would have to double check that.
That's going to be part of, that was
We've been to Lancashire.
Yeah?
Yeah. We say it.
Beautiful cathedral there.
Yeah,
beautiful cheese.
Yeah.
Lovely, delicious cheese.
And Mr. Whippy's.
Mr. Whippy's in England.
okay.
Anyway, let's
All right.
The other question is family history. Because that's another story we have to always do, but when you go in the museum and you put where your family is from, which I love that, are you a resource for people that are traveling through trying to research their family history, especially with this being this set up society? Was family history records, was that something that anyone thought of back in the day, like we need to store our records?
Yes, and in fact, in the first year that the Greeley Tribune was published, after just 2 months of publication, Nathan Meeker wrote a little article about he I think had a premonition that this would become a very important community. And so he said, every day while we are out on the prairies uncovering fossils and important things and whatever documents we are producing, he said, we need to be mindful of collecting these things so that they can come together as our common treasures and be put into a museum for the education of all. Wow. And so this was very early on.
This is what not drinking does for you.
This is what not drinking. Yes, this is what comes to us with our, our morality, our temperance, our hard work, as Meeker would say. Yes. So indeed, by 1900, a group of club women in Greeley got together and formed the Meeker Memorial Library Association. And the reason for doing so was to collect photographs, diaries, letters, recollections of members of the Union colony who came here and, built the town of Greeley. And so, in essence, the heart of our collection dates back to a group of club women who preserved many of the records when our library was built in 1907, 1908. there was a room in the basement for storing these pioneer artifacts and documents. And then in 1929, the Meeker Memorial Association, it dropped the word library after a while, started a campaign along with the city of Greeley and other efforts by local clubs such as the Kiwanans and the Rotarians to purchase the Meeker home and open it as the city's first museum. So it opened then on October 1st, 1929, 50 years after the Meeker Massacre.
Wow.
So, yes.
Wow.
So that's how it started. We eventually had a municipal museum that opened in a new library in 1968, and then when those this building, it became available then in 2002, the city passed a 2A quality of life initiative providing over $20 million for improvements to recreational and cultural infrastructure throughout the city. So we were able to purchase the Greeley Tribune building and preserve it and renovate it as the Greeley History Museum. So we opened in July of 2005 here. So all the documents, all the archives were transferred here and became a part of the Hazel E. Johnson Research Center. So we have a fine collection of family files and memorabilia, maps, books related to the history of Greeley and all of Weld County, including Old Weld County. Weld County was one of 17 original counties established by the territorial legislature in 1861. And of course, eventually by 1884, the county, it was a huge county originally, 10,500 square miles, but it gets divided into 6 counties. So our county today is still quite substantial, 3,999 square miles.
Wow. Wow. So, I've got to give a shout out. So we just did our family history story now, too. So Holly Hansen sent us on. She is known as the Gen Teacher. She's the founder of FamilyHistoryExpos.com. So she teaches people how to trace their family history. So she said, get out there. Go find this family history resources.
Just found
because
it.
people do travel to stand where their family was, to get the information. I know you can do it online and you can, contact museums like here.
Yes,
but to go to the place
It's more
itself,
fun to go.
to be where your ancestors
Yes.
were.
That's better.
So do any of the Meeker family come here?
We do not have a large number of direct descendants through the Meeker family. And so I could maybe tell you more of that story maybe when we're up in the Meeker home. But and I'll do that. But I was going to say, currently we have a huge collection, like the Greeley Tribune, for example. You have heard of the old morgue files that newspapers keep.
Oh, yeah.
And so what that meant, that every time an obituary appeared in a newspaper, there was a librarian or a staff member at the newspaper who would clip it out, file it alphabetical for future reference. They did this for topics as well, if they were, agricultural topic or industry or businesses or whatever. So we have all of the old, what I call biographical files from the Greeley Tribune, 120,000 names. All of these names have been indexed, and you can find them on an Ancestry, rootsweb.ancestry.com site through a local link to the Weld County Genealogical Society.
Wow. Okay.
It's called the Weld County Master Index. A woman named Jackie Glavinick has uploaded, I think about 1,400,000 names from 460 sources related to individuals here in Greeley and Weld County. So it would be census records, divorce records, burial records, probate records. So anyone, just knowing this site from around the world can begin to link into what we have here in terms of genealogical and historical resources. It's a great pleasure. We save things and they're in the files. They're in archival storage, so in an environment with acid-free folders, boxes, and papers, and also in a climate-controlled environment where we regulate the temperature and humidity for the long-term preservation of books, prints, maps, photographs. Nitrate film, we have that stored in freezers with some of the early images that were on nitrate films, glass plate negatives, and so on. It's a huge treat when someone comes from, say, New Hampshire, and they're an avid genealogist, and they have a relative who they know was a member of the Union Colony, and they've spent years tracking it down, and we pull out a file with a photograph of that person and information related to that person. I've actually seen people just cry, say, I've looked for 20 years, and here in this little community, here it is. So,
that's really cool.
And the more that we know about our ancestors of the past, who liked certain things, who did certain things, the more we can come to know and understand ourselves in the present, and the more that we can become good stewards, not only of the land, but of our community. And by community, I mean the global community, because we have people
we're all connected
from all over the world. We're all connected, so it's a great thing to explore
really
our roots.
I love it.
I want to go look.
I know.
I want to play.
So everyone, you can go to visitgreeley.org to learn more. Does the museum have a website, or is it?
Yes, so it would be www.greeleymuseums.com.
Museums with an S.
Yes, because we have 4 museums, but you will then find links on there to the Hazel Lee Johnson Research Center.
Okay.
And also a lot of materials, finding aids are listed online for some of our larger and more important collections.
Thank you so much.